Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be sharing books I thought I would hate, but ended up loving. Alright guys, so I got this idea from Tori from Novel Life and then McKay from Oh Hey It's McKay. They both did this video, so I will leave their videos linked down in the description below. But I thought this would be really fun since there are a lot of books that I either thought I wouldn't like based off the plot or the cover and then ended up loving. So there's a mix of fantasy romance and romance books in this video, and I'm going to explain why I thought I would hate these books and then why I ended up loving them and a little bit of what each book is about. And if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit the notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram and Goodreads, both linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about these books. All right, so first up, we have Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. So I thought I was going to hate this series. I read A Court of Thorns and Roses first, and I loved it. It was amazing. I actually finished that series, immediately went back and reread it. But when I was looking online, everyone said that Throne of Glass was much younger. It was much more young adult. There wasn't a lot of romance. There was no spice, and it was just nothing like ACOTAR. So I didn't pick it up. So then I ended up reading Crescent City, which I did really enjoy. And I had a massive book hangover. So I went back and I started Throne of Glass, and I am so happy I did because I love this series so much. It is very close to ACOTAR level of love for me. So I will say the first two books in this series, not counting Assassin's Blade, do read very young. And the main character is so annoying and full of herself. However, she does grow a lot as you progress through the series. Also, there is a very significant romance that does play a huge role in this series overall. It's just not super spicy, and honestly, you're not gonna miss the spice. This story is epic. It is absolutely amazing, and I am so happy I didn't listen to everybody and I actually went off and read this because I really, really enjoyed it and highly recommend. One of my top fantasy romances. Also, real quick, I forgot to mention this, the dust jacket for this is actually a paperback dust jacket. I don't own the hardbacks of Throne of Glass, so I will link down below in the description where I got these dust jackets from. I will say you have to check which paperbacks you have. There's two different versions of the paperbacks, so these dust jackets only fit a certain one. So know that, but I'm obsessed. These are gorgeous and they were pretty reasonably priced, so check them out down in the description below. Once again, not sponsored, just absolutely in love. And next up is a book that I was actually almost too intimidated to start. There is just so much like taboo feelings surrounding this book. I thought it was going to be straight PORN, and it wasn't. So that is Credence by Penelope Douglas. So this was actually one of the first romance books I ever read. And at the time I was like going through Goodreads, and there is definitely like a love-hate relationship with this book. Some people absolutely love it. I am one of them. Some people absolutely hate it, and that is totally fine. So I ended up starting it, and then as I was reading, I was like, oh my gosh, this story is absolutely amazing. So if you're unfamiliar with what Credence is about, we are following Tiernan, and she ends up being an orphan and moves in with her step-uncle and his two sons, and they end up all getting snowed in together. But really it's a story of Tiernan learning how to love, how to fit into a family. There's also, this is kind of a spoiler, kind of not, this like rule of three where I believe it's Tiernan's mother or someone gives her advice that your third relationship is like the most important relationship, and like that's the one that like will stick. And then that kind of happens throughout this book. But overall, this is very spicy and it is very, very taboo. Definitely check trigger warnings. There's a reason people talk about this being like one of the most taboo books. But yeah, I absolutely loved it, and I am so happy I took a chance and ended up reading it. And this next series I actually just read this year, and I am so happy I did. And it is the Shatter Me series by Tahar Murphey. I actually have a full spoiler-free reading vlog I will leave in the cards and the description of me reading this series for the first time. So why was I afraid to pick up this series? Mostly it's because it came out a very long time ago, at least the first three books. And I was afraid that I was just too old for it at this point. I thought I was gonna read kind of like the Divergent series. I think it came out around that time. And I just felt like I was too old to like really appreciate it. I knew a lot of people talked about Aaron Warner. And then finally, one of my friends left an Aaron Warner quote on one of my videos. And I was like, ooh, that doesn't sound YA. So I decided that it was time. I was going to read this series, and I loved it. I loved it so much. Aaron Warner is like a new top tier book boyfriend. But if you've never read the series, we are following Juliet. And Juliet has been living in isolation. And that is because her skin is poisonous. So anyone who touches her skin to skin will suddenly feel horrible pain, and they can eventually die. So she's pretty much been living like in a jail cell with no company. And then she is suddenly taken out of this jail cell, and she is given to this regime. And we find out that the leader of this regime wants to use Juliet as a weapon. And the story goes from there, and I really, really loved it. It was so good. I will say the first 3 books feel very different from the most recent 3 books that were released, but not in a bad way. They just have a completely different vibe. They're a little bit darker. And I enjoyed all of them. I think the first 3 are very romance heavy, and then the last 3 are more of the whole dystopian, like action movie feel. But overall, I love this series, and if you have not picked it up yet, I highly recommend. And next up is a age gap romance. So we have June 1st by Jennifer Hartmann. Now, I love most of the books I've read by Jennifer Hartmann. I think all of them I've given it at least 3.5 stars. This book, it seems like a lot of people that are huge fans of Jennifer Hartmann actually rated pretty low. It is an age gap romance, and it is a step-sibling romance. I am one of those people that step-sibling romances really aren't for me, especially if the people that are falling in love actually grew up together and shared a childhood together, just because I feel like even if you're not blood related, like being that close and going through so many things as you're growing up, I just don't know how I feel about you suddenly having a romantic relationship as adults. So I was very concerned about this book because a lot of people talk about how the majority of this book is watching these 2 people grow up together. Like they're children for more than half of this book. So I thought I was gonna hate it. I don't know why. I was obsessed with this book. I'm still obsessed with this book. I absolutely loved it. I think it is my favorite step-sibling romance, and it has everything I hate about step-sibling romances, but the story is just so emotional. I ugly cried twice while reading this. I will say, go in with tissues ready, because the first half of this book is just very upsetting moment after very upsetting moment, that by the middle of the book, you just want the main character to catch a break and get some happiness. So I overall very much enjoyed this. I actually recommended this to a friend who doesn't read a lot of romance, and even she loved it, despite the fact that these 2 step-siblings really are raised together, and they're raised like brother and sister. But overall, I absolutely love this, and this might be my favorite Jennifer Hartmann book. Next book, I didn't think I would hate it. I just had absolutely no interest in reading it. And that is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. So I actually got this as a fairy loot book probably over a year ago, and I remember opening the box and being like, oh, this is from the same author that wrote Caraval, and I wasn't a huge fan of that series. So it kind of just sat on my shelf for months, and then my friend Isa from Fun Fantasy Books said, hey, you need to read this book. It's amazing. It was actually The Ballad of Never After, which is the sequel to this, but you have to read this book first. So I remember we were like FaceTiming, and I pulled the book out, and she was like, how do you have that edition? So I decided to read it, and I loved it. I did love The Ballad of Ever After more, but I did really enjoy this. I rated this 4 stars. So if you're unfamiliar with the story, we are following Evangeline Fox, and she is this girl that lives pretty much like in a fairy tale world, and she is very much in love with her friend. Now, her friend is going to marry her stepsister, and Evangeline is just so distraught over this. So she ends up making a deal with a fate. Now, fates in this world are notorious for just kind of being tricksters. You're not supposed to make deals with them, but Evangeline is just so desperate, she makes a deal with Jack, who is the fate of broken hearts, or the Prince of Broken Hearts, and his kiss is known to be deadly. So he's actually introduced in the Caraval series. Anyway, he agrees that he will stop the wedding if Evangeline promises 3 kisses from any men of Jack's choosing. She agrees, and the story goes from there. So I did very much enjoy this book. However, The Ballad of Never After, 5 star. It is my favorite YA fantasy romance of all time. If you have not read it yet, please read this series. The last book is going to come out later this year, and I cannot wait. I'm so excited. Jax is by far one of my favorite love interests in any book I've ever read, so highly, highly recommend. All right, next up is a book that I was positive I wasn't gonna like, but because I had just read another book by this author, I wanted to give it a shot, and that is Sweet Dandelion by Micalea Smeltzer. So why did I think I was gonna hate this book? So I work in education, for those of you who don't know. I'm not gonna go into exactly what my job is, but it has to do with the guidance office, and the love interest, or like the male main character in this, is a guidance counselor who ends up being with his student. So right away, I was like, one, hits way too close to home. Two, you are in a position of authority. There is no way you should be sleeping with a student. Not okay, especially because you're supposed to be helping the student with past trauma. Like, big red flags. I'm gonna hate this book. However, I had just read The Confidence of Wildflowers by Micalea Smeltzer, which I also thought I was gonna hate, and it was one of my favorite reads of that year. So I picked this up. I ended up giving this book 5 stars. I loved Lachlan, and I actually forget the main character's name. I loved their romance. I loved the fact that Lachlan actually gives our main character time to make sure the relationship is what she wants or what she needs. It was just an absolutely amazing story, and I still think about this book all of the time. So if you're looking for a really good like student, teacher, guidance counselor, teacher romance, highly recommend Sweet Dandelion. All right, so this next book is the only book I think I can ever say I DNF'd 3 times before I finally finished the book and then ended up devouring the entire series, and it is one of my favorite fantasy romances of all time. So I am so thankful to all of my friends that kept saying, you need to get through the first book, and it becomes absolutely amazing. Like, I had certain friends that just know my reading taste really well, and were like, this book checks all of your boxes, you're gonna love this series, get over the fact that you don't like the main character. So the series is the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy. So Gild I ended up DNFing so many times, and it is because of RN. So if you're unfamiliar with Gild, we are following RN, and this is a very loose King Midas like reimagining. So RN is the gilded pet of Midas. She is gold, and she has ribbons coming out of her back, and she is Midas's pet, essentially, is what he calls her. So she is in a gilded cage. She's in a cage in this palace, and Midas just kind of like uses her to show off, essentially. And she has no autonomy whatsoever. She is completely subservient to Midas. All she cares about is Midas protecting her and Midas being happy. She just like drinks all day, and she lives a really sad life, but I think it's really important that we get to see this side of her in order for us to see her grow as a character, and boy, does she grow throughout this series. Oh my goodness, I love this series. If you're a fan of A Court of Thorns and Roses, I think you will absolutely love this. It is a little bit darker, and I also will say the first few books aren't very spicy. I mean, there is a little spice. This first book starts off with like an orgy scene, but as you progress, it gets spicier and spicier. I'm also obsessed with the love interest, and it's so, so good. So please give this series a chance. It is one of my all-time favorites. And the last book is A Million Kisses in Your Lifetime, and this is by Monica Murphey. So I am not a fan of new adult. I'm especially not a fan of new adult or books that are set in high school when it comes to romance. So when I think of like high school romance, I think of Punk 57, and I just remember finishing that book and being like, why wasn't this book set in college? Like, all of this could have happened in a college setting and I wouldn't have felt so grossed out. So I've pretty much avoided like high school romances since reading that book. But I think it was Tori from Novel Life was like talking about this book, how much she loved it. So I decided to try it out, and I am so happy I did. I loved this romance and this book. I read this book in a day, and like, it is thick. But this is a like prep school romance. We're following Crew, and I think the girl's name is Ren. I could be mistaken. But anyway, Ren and Crew, like at first they hate each other. She's like a spoiled goody two-shoes, and then Crew is like the bad boy that's super popular, and they end up having a romance together when they're forced to be partners on a project, and it is their story, and it is so good. I will never look at lollipops the same way. I will say that. But overall, this was such a fun contemporary romance, and I just absolutely loved it, and I'm so happy I gave it a try. All right, guys, that is it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and please let me know down in the comments below what is a book you thought you would hate but ended up absolutely loving. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!